Okay, welcome everybody to this May meeting of Inner West Council, and thank you everybody for attending. Before we start, I would just like to acknowledge we are meeting on land of the Gadigal and Wangal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to elders past and present. I just need to provide some advice regarding the live streaming of council meetings which Inner West Council undertakes. So, in the spirit of open, accessible and transparent government, the council meetings are streamed live on council's website. The camera is focused on the front of the chamber, not on speakers or the public. However, by speaking at a council meeting, members of the public agree to being recorded and must ensure their speech to council is respectful and uses appropriate language. A person who uses defamatory, discriminatory or offensive language may be exposed to liability for which council takes no responsibility. Any part of the meeting held in closed session will not be streamed but will be recorded for the purpose of verifying the accuracy of the minutes. But there is no part of tonight's meeting in closed session. I do also declare I have no interest in any matter listed on the business paper. And I do also move and declare carried the minutes of the council meeting which was held on the 26th of April. I also need to let people know the meeting is governed by the Code of Meeting Practice of the former Leichhardt Council. And the Code of Meeting Practice does actively encourage open council meetings where members of the public can speak for up to 3 minutes on items listed on the agenda. So before we start the actual meeting, I'm just reorganising a couple of items just at the request of members who are here to speak tonight. I just want to deal with, firstly, the draft inclusion action plan, which I think is item, help me out someone, item 10. So we'll deal with that first, and then we put out a late supplementary agenda which had the minutes of the LRAC and IAG meetings. These normally occur at the start of the meeting, so we'll deal with that second. Both those items should be relatively brief, and then we go into the substantive, we go into the actual listed order of the agenda, which will be the WestConnex update followed by the other items. So I do have, I think, a speaker on the first item, which is the draft disability action plan, and I've got Jackson Ross, if he's in the chamber. Yep, Jackson, are you able to come forward and use the microphone? Yeah, unfortunately we don't have a roving mic, so yeah, we do need to use the fixed mic. We can just move the chair. Thank you. Thanks, Jackson.
Inner West. But yeah, I just want to say that I fully, sorry, can I just put that up there? Yeah, I guess that it has there's been a lot of process to the Disability Inclusion and Action Plan, and I have thoroughly read it, and I guess all the actions I fully agree with, and that they really are expressing the needs of a diverse community, and really, I guess, yeah, is just being fully addressed. But yeah, thank you. So
Thank you very much, Jackson.
I didn't realise that I was first up.
Yeah, no. Sorry. Opening the batting's a good thing, though. And thanks for doing that. Did anybody else want to speak on this item? It went to consultation in April, I think, and we did receive a number of comments, but I might just ask the relevant officer, have we got John maybe, just to say a couple of words before I consider the plan.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Pearson. The Disability Inclusion Action Plan is obviously a key part of Council's strategy for inclusion leading up to the adoption of the NDIS coming up later in the year. So this is absolutely vital in setting the direction for how Council ensures that all of our community are included in everything that Council does, and will set strategic guidance across every area of Council, whether we're building parks, whether we're building footpaths, or we're in terms of planning, doesn't matter what the area, it's actually setting some guidance to ensure that we actually take these issues into account and really ensure that every member of our community is included.
Thank you. And look, the only other point I'll make, and it was made when this was considered by the Local Representation Advisory Committee earlier this month, and we have added this in following that meeting, is a need to do what we can to improve the workforce participation in the inner west of people with a disability. So we've added a specific action to develop benchmarks and targets to work towards Council's workforce, mirroring the demographics of the inner west community in relation to persons with a disability. So that will result, I think, that will result in an upward trend in people employed by Inner West Council with a disability. So that was feedback that we were very happy to take on board from the Local Advisory Committee meeting of May, and that is point 4 of the recommendation that's before you on the screen now. So with those words, I'm very happy to adopt the Inclusion Action Plan and acknowledge the very hard work that staff have performed over the recent months in getting that together, and to community members and particularly people from the disability sector in the valuable input they've given to that plan. So thank you all, and we adopt that plan. So thanks very much. Now move to, it's actually item 14, which is the minutes of the LRAC and IAG meetings. And I think we have John Stamalis registered to speak on that item.
Thank you. This is the last opportunity that we'll have to talk about the FSR methodology for the Leichhardt area that's apparently now been approved. In making my comments, I do not refer to whether the new FSRs are too high, whether they're too low or about right. That's not the purpose about what I'm going to say. I'll simply raise again that our community has been left with a flawed methodology, and one which is open to interpretation by Council and not easily understood by the community or planners. When this happens, Council has complete discretion and control, while the resident, whether an applicant or objector, is at the whim of Council's interpretation of its flawed FSR policy. This is not ideal. We develop policies in Council with the aim of public accountability and transparency, and this policy has not achieved that. To dismiss its lack of rigour on the FSR policy, Council has repeated over many years, this is just one of a suite of controls. Well, that does not mean that you should deliver the public with policy which has clear flaws. Applicants, designers and objectors will use this policy as a reference standard, and they will be frustrated by a lack of coherence and by Council being the arbiter as how to judge how the flaws should be managed. This creates inefficiency all round, including for Council. Let's have a quick look at one of the problems. Why does Council's new option 3 make a block in Balmain or Birchgrove with a size of 165 square metres have less floor space than a blocks with 150 square metres? Is this an error? How will Council correct this error? Will Council say, I know that you have a bigger block than your neighbour, but your house must be smaller? How will designers work with this? Will they design a smaller house only to be told by Council later, actually you could design one slightly bigger? These flaws go right throughout the FSR matrix as it's presented. It's a shame that after 8 years, we are left with an FSR policy with so many flaws, confusing to anyone who looks at it, and it will potentially cost Council more. It will confuse applicants and annoy designers and objectors. It took 8 years to develop this policy when a far simpler option and more basic option was available to us. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else on this item? This is, bear in mind now we're talking about the minutes. Item 14, the minutes of the LRAC and IAG meetings. the item that John's discussed is item 3 on the agenda, and there are other people who want to speak when we get to item 3, which I might save a response to John's issue till we come to item 3. But I will move to note the minutes of those 2 meetings in May, and then move back now to item 1, which is the WestConnex report. Before I move to speakers, and we have quite a number of registered speakers for this item, I just would put up the current amended resolution that I'm proposing for WestConnex. So if you can make that available, because I made a number of changes to which are encapsulated in point number 5, rather than just receiving and noting. Even though this thing's only been out for about a couple of weeks, we do need to get on the front foot with it. And so what I'm proposing is that I make representations to the Minister for WestConnex in relation to the design documentation that's been put out for stage 3, that raises the significant concerns that are being felt in the Inner West community due to the general vague and selective nature of the plans that have been put out, and that they should either be withdrawn or immediately augmented to address concerns identified by Council, and also in a letter I received from the Coalition Against WestConnex yesterday. It had some quite explicit concerns, most of which Council supports, about the documentation that's been put out. I think there also needs to be, rather than the open-ended submissions period for the concept design plans, which is classic, leave it open-ended and then maybe people won't respond. There should be a firm closing date, which I'm suggesting should be not less than 8 weeks from the date of any new or amended plans being released. C, there should be no overlap between those design plans and the EIS, which is currently being suggested might occur, so that the consultation on the design plans will be of no consequence in terms of shaping the EIS documentation. So there needs to be a clear commitment not to have overlap in those 2 documents. And also in D, I'm suggesting that the EIS should be exhibited for a period of not less than 8 weeks. And given the imminent council elections, the closing date for submissions on the EIS should conclude after the council elections on the 9th of September to enable the newly elected council to finalise council's submission, rather than any attempt, whether it exists or not, I don't know, to try to conclude this process before council elections. So that's a substantive change I've proposed to what you'd see in the report that was issued by staff last week. And I will now move to speakers, of which I've got quite a few. I'll just go in order of listing, and I've got John Stamoulis to begin with.
Thanks. It's always interesting to hear governments and big business talk about restraint in public spending and living within our means. Yet during these most subdued economic times, government seems to find huge spending on projects such as this, with major benefit going to big business. Contrast that with the lack of focus on thousands of local businesses across the Inner West. There is not a shred of concerns if dozens of shops lie vacant in what should be vibrant shopping areas, no mention of jobs and growth here. WestConnex has $17 billion of spending which will bypass many local business villages, whereas new train stations and light rail would deliver populations into these areas. In many global cities, the transport system sustains and complements local commercial areas rather than bypasses these. The Inner West has seen our houses demolished, our heritage in piles of rubble, our neighbours forced to move out, open space compromised while dive sites and compounds disrupt traffic, all to allow for traffic volumes to reach unrealistic levels in the future. Leichhardt, Ashfield and Marrickville are all of the top 7 densely populated councils in the nation. Being right next to Victoria Road, Anzac Bridge and the City West links, we are traffic central in Australia. Not only do these huge traffic volumes affect local populations, we are seeing companies walk away from the Bays precinct at White Bay. One reason being the lack of good public transport to this area. The other is who wants to operate in an innovative industry next to large traffic interchange and near exhaust stacks. At the current rate of population growth, Sydney will add 1.3 million people in the next 10 years. We will add over 700,000 new registered vehicles in the next 5 years. Good luck if any road project, including WestConnex, can cope with that. Also, the notion that we should continue to build roads and expect people to drive for 1 or 2 hours each way to work for up to 30 kilometres with high daily tolls is odd indeed. What happened to the 30-minute city? We are still planning and designing for the 3 to 4 hour return commute each day. Many people have no choice but to drive because Sydney does not invest in quality public transport, nor growing those job opportunities outside the CBD. The majority of jobs in 2016 are still in the eastern sector of our city. This exacerbates the traffic problem. Think of all the freeways that have been built over the past 25 years. Travel times haven't improved for the vast majority of workers. The proportion of workers and others sitting in long traffic delays is rising and will continue to rise as population increase, as densities rise and as vehicle registrations escalate. I defy any traffic and road project planner to beat those odds. Nor do we receive any real justification as to why a particular road project is favoured. There appears to be an acceptance that the Western Harbour Tunnel is needed, but I would like to see some robust...
Another minute, John.
Thank you. Robust analysis to support this, given its cost to the public. I hope that Council pursues this. Using vast sums of public money on delivering poor outcomes for our city is not wise. Just as many jobs could be created by enhancing public transport, and this might help prevent even larger congestion costs in the future, currently estimated at $6 billion per year by our own state government. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Rochelle Porteous.
Thank you. Pays to register last. You get to speak first. Look, in general, I think there's a lot of good in the proposals that are in this particular report. I certainly support the continued funding of the community organiser and the funding to go to the Rozelle Against WestConnex. I think there's more that needs to be done in terms of funding, and I'm referring particularly to the Western Sydney Harbour Tunnel, which is also part of the WestConnex project. I've attended on Saturday the public displays by RMS, which had a very high attendance, and I believe it was a very high attendance as well on the previous day, and also the meeting that was held by our local member Jamie Parker last night, which was the standing room only for the issue of the Western Harbour Tunnel. And I think that it's something that the Inner West Council needs to make sure they're addressing in terms of providing that level of submission which the community is unable to do. I mean, what we need, similar to the needs we have with the stage 3, we need a substantial amount of money to be allocated in order to do the quality submission that simply the community on its own can't afford to do. We need to have the best experts who are going to be doing the analysis of the air quality, the best experts analysing the noise issues, the vibration issues, the geotechnical issues, because if we can't do it as a council, then we're letting down the community. And I think ratepayers as one would see that that's money very well spent in order to, obviously what we want is to stop that tunnel tollway from going ahead underneath the Balmain Peninsula. And the best way to stop it is with excellent evidence, and the best time to stop it is now when it's still at a concept design stage, and we know that there are lots of different options there, and that it simply shouldn't go ahead at all. It's a dud of a project, it's a disaster of a project, and would be a disaster not just for the Balmain Peninsula, for the whole of the West. So I would like to ask that it be added to the motion tonight that an allocation, I think another 250,000 is the amount that would need to be added in order to do, because there's also traffic modelling that needs to be done. There's issues around where those ventilation stacks are going, the length and direction of that tunnel. It really needs a lot of expertise to go into it. And unless that's allocated now, and we get working now on that, because we know that the exhibition period ends at the end of the July, I understand, we're not going to be able to provide that quality submission that we need to provide.
Another minute, Rochelle.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I would also like to speak in favour of the letter that you've received in terms of the from the coalition of community groups against WestConnex. It's vitally important for the stage 3 as well that we get a clear period of time, which is at the minimum 12 weeks for the stage 3 reference design, which is out in exhibition at the moment. I was quite shocked when I spoke to the representative of SMC on Saturday to find out that they had no endpoint for that. They'd end it whenever they felt like it. And by default, what that was implying was that the EIS could start at any point as well. We need a definite endpoint for that so that the community knows up until what time they can make submissions. We need a period of time after the endpoint. I would suggest at least 2 months for the consideration of submissions and then a start of the EIS after that. That's the only way you're going to get anything which would resemble in any way reasonable consultation. And I'd ask again that that be taken on by the Inner West Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter here.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you. Shall I start again? Okay, good. And obviously their weapon of choice seems to be the bulldozer and a pretty powerful PR machine, which is obviously backed up by mainstream media, commercial networks and the like. I note your endorsement and I thank you for that. I think $3,300 doesn't sound like a lot, but when you consider that we've raised the same amount of money by selling T-shirts and cakes and through $1 and $2 donations over the past many months, and that represents 50% of the cost of this tabloid, I think it's a great move on the part of the council, and I certainly thank you. Just for the benefit of the people who are viewing this webcast, I'd simply like to give them some idea of the areas that we hope to cover, just in terms of the structure, 16 pages, full colour. It's tabloid format, 60,000 copies in the print run. It'll be distributed essentially by the networks that exist via the various resident groups. It has the support of all of those groups. There'll be contributions from each of those groups. And just in terms of the content, the areas that we hope to cover are the feasibility, the desirability of this project, the corruption allegations that have been levelled against both Leighton's, now CIMIC, and also AECOM overseas in their operations, the tolls, the compulsory acquisitions, the fact that some people have just been remunerated at the rate of about 60 cents in the dollar, the recommendations of the Australian National Audit Office, pollution, health, the cancer clusters. This is a really interesting point. M5 East, there's been a study undertaken by the Sydney Southwest Area Health Service, which indicates that people who live adjacent to the M5 East stack have actually suffered a significant increase in lung cancers. That's been quantified as a result of this study at 40%. And at the same time, in this period that they looked at between 2002 and 2007, the overall rate of cancers in New South Wales has decreased by 9%. Those are pretty startling statistics, especially when you consider that they're proposing 3 massive stacks in the Rozelle Goods Yard and a 4th in the middle of Victoria Road. The other issues that we'll touch on, of course, are amenity, rat running, the privatisation of public resources, the need for a unified public transport system.
Another minute.
Thank you, sir. The upgrading of heavy rail in terms of maintenance and signalling, extending the light rail obviously in a sensitive manner. There are instances where light rail has been rolled out in a manner that is infinitely less than sensitive. Certainly that's something that needs to be avoided. The dive sites we will certainly be looking at, construction sites, the choke points that are obviously going to eventuate as a result of this proposal, the lack of consultation, the lack of planning, the lack of information, and the lack of any real community feedback. So finally, I just again want to thank you, Richard, for your endorsement of this proposition. I think it is a huge step in the right direction. And again, I can assure you the money will be very well spent. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris Eleanor.
I'm Chris Eleanor, and I'm the co-convener of No West Connects Public Transport. So I've been responsible for actually making submissions to a range of people to raise monies for the community organiser. The reality about this was that, like Peter was saying in terms of the newsletter, the early money for this position was raised from the community. Okay, and I also have to thank some of the people here who were on the former councils that were amalgamated for supporting the position for the community organised for No West Connect. It has actually made a huge difference. I can do no better than to quote from the report by the council officer in relation to this. The community organiser has furthered community education and has facilitated organisation of the various inner West community groups that oppose West Connects. This has enabled strong and coordinated advocacy by the community groups and increased capacity of residents to identify non-compliance and comment constructively on detailed plans. Goes on to say, council officers concur with Now PT that the work of the community organiser has been beneficial to council, to local West Connects opposition groups and to the local community. Okay, so I commend the motion to you. And I essentially remains me to thank the administrator and the council officers for continuing support for this position. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Paul Jeffrey.
Good evening. My name is Paul Jeffrey. I'm on various community groups that are anti-West Connects. And I just want to reiterate what has already been said. There's not much left to say about it, what these guys before me have said. But I want to commend council to support the position of community organiser, because in the long run, it will benefit all those people, all those residents that live in West Connect, in a West Connects footprint in the inner West. There is not one single independent traffic engineer that supports the project West Connects. There's probably not one health officer of any note that would support it either. It's not supported by community. It's not supported by council. It's only supported by a faction of a government. And it's been thrust upon us by undemocratic means, and they've done everything they can to try and thwart the public from having their say against it. And the position of community organiser actually helps and assists council in its opposition to West Connects, and I commend it to council to support it.
Thanks, Paul. Catherine Gamble.
Good evening. I'm Catherine Gemmell, co-convener of Leichhardt against WestConnex. I would like to comment on the Council's report on the exhibition of the M4-M5 link concept design. Council has identified a number of concerns and will be investigating these further. A newly formed coalition of 10 groups against WestConnex, representing communities the length of the M4-M5 link and beyond, considers that the concept design document either deliberately or incompetently misleads, confuses, and obfuscates by reason of its format and content. This coalition wrote to you yesterday, Administrator, detailing these concerns, and I thank you for including them in the revised motion. And we also provided you with a copy of a letter that we sent to Stuart Ayres, the Minister for WestConnex, yesterday. These concerns are summarised in the document we're tabling, which also sets out the remedial action required to bring the concept design document up to an acceptable standard. They include that the document is formatted as an A3 document, yet most in the community will print it on A4 paper. The result is illegible font and unclear diagrams and images. The document is hard to read online also, and it does not meet the New South Wales Government's accessibility requirements. Insufficient hard copies are available for the community. It contains inaccurate, confusing, and misleading content. It omits images of the very features that are of concern to the community, such as the unfiltered smokestacks. It does not inform about construction vehicle movements or location of worker parking or traffic impacts. It is almost as if Sydney Motorway Corporation have set out to make the document as frustrating and inaccessible as they could get away with, so as to thwart any attempt to provide feedback. It also looks as if they have sought to minimise the adverse aspects of the design, whilst only emphasising the so-called benefits of new green spaces adjacent to smokestacks. The concept design is intended to provide a source of information to the community, the feedback from which will inform the environmental impact statement. SMC is required to undertake this mandated statutory consultation process in good faith and appropriately. SMC are placing the community at a disadvantage and are undermining the consultation process by issuing this substandard document. They fail to provide the community with complete information about the design in a manner which enables it to understand what is proposed. As a result, the entire community consultation process is compromised. We therefore ask that the Council will seek the immediate withdrawal, amendment and reissuing of the concept design. And we'll seek can I have another minute?
Yep, sure.
We'll seek an undertaking by the government that it will include a closing date for the concept design to ensure the community is clear about the date by which their submissions must be received in order to be taken into account for the EIS. The agreed 12-week consultation period should recommence from the date that the community is provided with a corrected document upon which they can actually comment. The timeline should be included in the reissued concept design document. And the Inner West Council should seek written confirmation that the EIS will not be issued until after the 12-week consultation period for the concept design has closed. And there should be a 2-month period between the close of the concept design and the start of the EIS so that it can truly inform the EIS. That concludes my comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. Chris Woods.
Thank you, Richard. I'd like to thank community speakers tonight. I really haven't got much to say about WestConnex, apart from the fact that as an LRAC member, it's been a great pleasure of mine to attend the WestConnex Community Forum meetings, where our community has had a really an opportunity to say how they feel about WestConnex and to start actions that have been supported by the Inner West Council. It's been a great pleasure to work with those people. I'd like to thank them for coming here tonight and speaking to us about the plans that they have for it. the work that's gone by the community forum and will go a long way to getting our community through the great sadness that really is stage 3. The impact on our community will be considerable, but I think that the actions of our community groups will be the bright light on the hill, and I thank you for your support for those community members and the action groups that will work with us to get us through this. And I thank you very much tonight.
Thank you, Chris. John Lozano. Sure. Alice Kershaw.
Good evening. Thank you for letting me speak. Most of my comments have been already made by other people. However, most people don't know, as well as lung cancer, which is caused by smokestacks, it is asthma, chronic obstructive airways disease, and other diseases. These are preventable. We are going back to the early 19th century towns that were the mill towns. If we don't have the stacks having filters on them, this is a very backward step. Furthermore, with regard to the Western Harbour Tunnel, when I first came to Rozelle, one of my friends down the street was the son of one of the men who worked as a miner in the Balmain coal mine. I was informed that the mine maps that they have aren't accurate. Furthermore, and this is from state records, the coal mine was about from 1901 to 1931, and it stopped manufacturing then. However, from 1939 to 1941-42, they harvested methane from the coal mine. We now have a coal mine with uncharted mine workings and 74 years of methane sitting ready to blow.
Thank you, Alice. Mark Drury.
Good evening, Administrator. I'm Mark Drury of Ashfield, and I note that there's a recommendation to fully fund the West Connects community organiser past the 29th of September 2017. I note that Clover Moore, as the democratically elected Mayor, Lord Mayor of the city, has not committed funds to this, and I don't think you, as an administrator, should be making such a decision. I supported the decision that Council made to fully fund the position up until the 29th of September because our community was robbed of political representation by decisions of the state government to sack our councils. The people of the Inner West go to the polls on the 9th of September this year, and I think a newly elected council should decide if fully funding the position is the most effective way to raise the legitimate concerns that residents have on one of this state's most ill-conceived and poorly executed projects. For me, I think that our community would be far better served if we had our former mayors, Lucille, Darcy and Sam, still in power, able to take on the state government and whatever vehicle they were using to progress West Connects. I'm yet to be convinced that an ongoing community organiser would suffice. What we need is a democratically elected council with a strong mayor who can take up this fight, and I'm counting down the sleeps until this will happen. Let me be crystal clear. I am not against a community organiser. I know what an organiser does. I spent 7 years of my life as an organiser and supervising organisers. I'm glad the position is funded to September. I don't think we should let the City of Sydney off the hook. And I think an elected council is the most appropriate body to make a democratic decision about how to coordinate the ongoing aspects of the campaign. Additionally, I support the point made by citizen Rochelle Porteous that council should set aside extra funding in its budget to get extra data and expertise to deal with this octopus. Administrator, indulge me for a moment on another topic. I have the worst condition known only to men. I have man flu, and I can't stay for item 13. But I am deeply troubled that council still cannot deliver capital projects within the times we promise, within the times we promise to the people. I had hoped a bigger council would fix this.
Another minute, Mark. Another minute.
Yes, please. I hoped a bigger council would fix this, but it doesn't seem to be the case. Could you please do something to prove me wrong?
If you promise to watch the webcast when you get home, Mark, we'll reply to you. So back to John Lozano, if you're ready to go, John, or if anybody else wants to speak on this item. I got Alex Offs.
I think this project should be called the West Conned, because the West has been conned into believing that this will somehow deliver them faster times to the city. So I have been utterly opposed to the West Connex, as my council was, as the former mayors were, ever since it was conceived. However, one thing that concerns me, and I support Mark Jury's comments in this, one thing that concerns me is that any campaign that we organise, or any community organiser that is funded by council, must be completely bipartisan. And I thank the people who have come here tonight and the tone in which they have delivered their objections to the West Connex and the bipartisan nature in which they seem to have approached it. However, I go back to the last federal election campaign when, instead of a truly community-based campaign against the West Connex, we had a partisan political campaign that was intended to damage the sitting member for Grayndler, Anthony Albanese. And the problem with that is that it excluded some of the best activists in the inner West. I felt I could not become part of that campaign because it was so clearly taken over by one political party. And it backfired. That's the problem with it becoming the province of one political group. It backfired. There was a swing to Anthony Albanese and a swing to him in some of the polling booths that were closest to the West Connex, because people saw it as a political campaign, not a genuine community campaign. So I would support the fact that a new council, made up of many political groupings, as it will be, should really determine the funding of a community organiser who should be seen to be absolutely separate from any political party, not someone who may, for example, have organised or ran a campaign for a political party. Now, getting back to the West Connex, it is a scandal what is happening. All we are doing is moving the crisis. That's the way the engineers seem to work. Suddenly, the crisis has moved the Anzac Bridge. Now we're going to have yet a new tunnel to try and solve that crisis, and we'll simply move it somewhere else. The West has been conned because they will be paying tolls for this, and the scandal of it is that the big end of town has been given taxpayer money to build this project. Then the big end of town will buy it at a reduced rate and therefore fleece the West of tolls forever after, which will increase at 4% a year. It seems to be in the Liberal Party or in this government's DNA and the federal government's DNA to shift money from the least well-off to the big end of town, to your mates at the big end of town. So,
Another minute, Alex.
just 30
Yep,
seconds.
sure.
So, to sum up, I think it will be a campaign issue in the coming inner West Council elections. It will be a campaign, but it would be better to be a bipartisan campaign and not simply a dishonest political campaign by one particular party. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. John, or there are others, but if you want to go now, John.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, unelected administrator. I'd like to talk about the EIS that was released recently. Now, I've been to more WestConnex presentation nights and community forums that I like to own up to. And the constant theme through all these sessions is always a lack of information and the general issue of misinformation. So I wasn't holding my breath when the EIS was coming out because I didn't think it was going to be a book written by the Oracle themselves. And there was going to be no new revelations. But I can't believe that it was written as cryptic as the Book of Revelations. Just to actually download, open, print, and read that document was a Sherlock Holmes mystery. And when you actually got to digest the information, God bless your little anal heart, it was full of errors. Now, I have heard of one of our residents who actually rang up WestConnex and were, informed them that one of their major diagrams was incorrect. Now, they responded by saying that, oh, that's outdated. That is an absolutely ludicrous response. Here we have a major document that's going to affect people's lives. Supposedly, they have put months of deep analysis into this document, supposedly. And in there is something that is out of date. It's not a question that the proofreader forgot. It's simply that they didn't care. It's out of date. This arrogance stems from the fact that they are a private organisation with a monopoly to boot, because I can't buy a motorway from anyone else in Sydney. This organisation simply doesn't care. And they were converted to a private organisation, so we couldn't actually hold them accountable to a variety of standards that other government departments are accountable to. And I'm not just talking about print standards and publishing standards. Look, I praise the council for their response to this, but I really, really feel that you need to go a little bit further, especially in the mainstream media. And I've said this for many, many, many months coming here. Now, I know under the circumstances, you need to be cognizant that you were appointed by the incumbent government without any representations from us. But I refuse to accept that you need to take this into consideration when performing your duties. Now, someone said just a minute ago that, oh, yes, the City of Sydney doesn't do this, doesn't do that. They don't have a funded position. Well, they don't have a funded position because they are constantly in the media talking about WestConnex and what, 1 minute please, what an absolute abomination that's going to be the City of Sydney. I have not heard that from you as an administrator. And I hope that's not because of the way you were placed in this role. I sincerely do hope so. At the last meeting, I inquired about the Reg Cody Reserve sale of land, and I remind you that you committed to actually giving us an update on that process. Finally, putting on my conspiracy hat, the same one that made me realise that the WestConnex resides very, very nicely within the boundaries of our amalgamated council. I also note that you had complaints about the sale of the inner western bus fleet, and I applaud you for that as well. I hope I looked at a map the other day, and I know that WestConnex is toying with Darley Road still, and they toyed with the school for a little bit. And then I looked in the middle of those two locations and I saw a bus depot. gee, I sincerely hope that that's not going to be undertaken a bit of construction anytime soon. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Lucille McKenna.
Thank you very much for the work, Richard, that you've already done on responding to the M4, M5 link concept design, and another very glossy document with lots of pictures. But I wanted to just mention that this community will be further impacted by the sale of the Sydney Motorway Corporation, which was announced in the Premier's press release from 2 Fridays ago. It was 2 small sentences with very little detail. But this will change this project from a project being carried out by a private corporation owned by the government, for the government, to a project being conducted by a private company working for its shareholders. This is an absolute concern, and the lack of detail, but we were told that it was going to be, the project would be, the sale would proceed later this year and be completed by mid next year. This is a disgraceful situation for this community to be contemplating. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucille. Other speakers on this item? Yes. Leslie.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Leslie Treleaven, and I represent Camperdown residents against WestConnex. I'd like to make a correction on the record that the City of Sydney, in the office of the Lord Mayor, has a fully funded position which is occupied by Justin McKee. He's an excellent organiser, and he's been very busy at the work for the last 3 weeks, I think. Secondly, unfortunately, I didn't hear all of the item proceeding. However, I would like to put on the record that Camperdown has its first ever consultation about the dive site. There was plenty of consultation about the portal with the University of Sydney, the Glebe Society, and the RPA. And as you all know, the portal was removed and the dive site was created. Subsequently, there has been no consultation whatsoever. We had a public meeting, our second public meeting this Sunday, at which I asked how many people had received the glossy blue and white pictorial representation of WestConnex, and about 60% of the people in the room had done so. 50% of them had attempted to open the document. Only 10% of the people had been able to open and read the document. And of that number, only 2%, which was 3 people in the room, were able to print the document. Now, it's questionable whether it's worth printing, and I've got 4 copies of it now. It's not worth reading because there is nothing substantial in that except errors and pictures. There is no maps, there is no scale, there are no legends that are accurate. We cannot even go to the collaborative map because the dive sites are not a place at which we can make any collaborative comments. I live probably 200 metres in the city quarter, and we cannot go to a dive site comment place. Now, presumably WestConnex will then say, we didn't receive any notes about that. That makes the consultation a farce. The second thing that's really, really insulting is this came out last week. Our consultation, our first ever and our only consultation, is this Thursday, and we can't even read the document.
Another minute, Leslie.
Thank you. In the document, there is one piece of new information, and it's wrong. The one piece of new information is that there will be 5 to 6 truck movements per hour, 11 hours a day for 6 days a week. In fact, inferring from the movements at both Sintra and Northcote, there will be between 40 and 45 truck movements a day. That's not even a decimal place wrong. That is huge. And that is misinformation. It's inaccurate. And to have us have a consultation with that level of disrespect, I think, is deplorable. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. Any other speakers?
40 to 45 an hour.
Yes, Joe.
I'm sorry.
It was 40 to 45 a day. That works out at over 400, an hour, I'm sorry. Yes, it's mind-boggling, isn't it? Thank you.
So my name's Jo Alley, and Richard, we haven't seen each other for a while. And you know how I feel about the role of the administrator, but I would like to say that I'm very pleased to see the motions that you've put forward tonight, and I think that's great, and I really appreciate it. I just wanted to say that I think it's incredibly important that the position of community organiser gets funded for a long period of time, as you've suggested. Many of the community groups here tonight have spoken in support of the position. I'm a member of Save Ashfield Park, who is a member of No WestConnex Public Transport, who've put forward the proposal. So I think there's huge community group support. No WestConnex Public Transport's an umbrella organisation. So I just wanted to make that statement. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Other speakers? Thought I saw someone. Yep. Richard.
Where is it? Page 9. Yes, my name's Richard Dudley Smith, and I'm part of the No WestConnex Annandale group. I can support everything that's been said today, especially what has been said by Peter Hare about the brochure that we so desperately need to get out in the community. We also really, really desperately need to have a coordinator all time. We don't need to have a gap where we haven't got a coordinator, because we're in basically the fight of our life here. This is a war. This is a war against a group of people who are sitting in the Parliament. I went to a reception last night where somebody said to me, "Oh my goodness me, it doesn't look as though there's very many of us, does it?" Well, in fact, actually, I then said to them, well, in fact, if you walked down the road and went into that damn building there, you would find that, in fact, we are pretty good. We number almost the same number as they are. And we are the people who are fighting this disastrous project. Also, I want to draw your attention to the fact that Camperdown Against WestConnex did put on this community consultation on Sunday, and one of the speakers was Paul Truzillo, who is the head person of the RPA respiratory disease unit. And that got reported. It's in the Inner West Courier today. And the thing that I would like to draw your attention to is the first sentence of this article. Heart disease will skyrocket due to air pollution caused by WestConnex bringing more cars into the Inner West. One of Australia's leading respiratory disease experts has warned. So I don't think there's anything else you can really say about it. I've talked about the pollution factor at this council before, and it's a scandal. And believe me that all the people sitting around here, and maybe people who are working at the council who've got young children, if they live in this area, I have a piece of advice to them. And the piece of advice I would give is move. I have been keeping residents who are neighbours and friends of mine in contact with what has been going on for about the last 18 months. I haven't been very successful. Nobody has come out and come to any of the demonstrations that I've been asking them to come to. But in fact, actually, I have been quite successful on one level. 5 of the 25 people that I've been emailing have sold up and have moved out of Sydney. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. Anyone else? Yes.
Good evening, Administrator, officers, and everyone else here tonight. I've noticed that every council meeting begins...
Your name, please.
Oh, I'm James Gilronan, resident of the Inner West. I've noticed that every council meeting starts typically with an item regarding WestConnex, and it brings some of the most impassioned responses and submissions that we see each night on the monthly meetings. I've noticed that there are very few pro-WestConnex voices to be heard anywhere in the Inner West, and I feel like we're at a point where most of the people in our area agree, if they care at all, that WestConnex is a bad thing. And my gratitude goes out to all of those volunteers and people who have given their time to make sure that this topic has been talked about and that all of the problems with this project have been voiced and written in papers and made obvious to all the people that care about the area. However, I do want to say something as a reminder to everyone here and everyone that cares about WestConnex, and that's that the project is a state government initiative, and the state government is run by members of parliament elected from seats all across New South Wales. I really feel as though it's time for this anti-WestConnex project, which the Inner West Council is thankfully putting over $100,000 into, to be broadcast on a wider stage. If the people of Greater Sydney and New South Wales don't start hearing about the problems and caring about them, then the state government is probably not going to change its tact. I do want to make my comment as a form of warning. I believe that if this is not taken seriously, the state government will continue to act against people. And in case some have not been made aware, the state government is now thinking of selling off public transport, buses in particular, in the Inner West region. The Inner West Council is a product of Ashfield, Marrickville and Leichhardt, 3 of the areas which were foreseen to be most likely affected by this project. And now our people have been sacrificed and perhaps in more ways in the future. Let's take this to the greater state.
Thank you, James. Anybody else on this item? Okay, I'm going to ask Kendall Banfield, Council's Manager, WestConnex Unit, to respond to some of the issues raised.
Thank you, Administrator. Look, I feel I don't need a detailed response. I think it's good to hear there's a lot of support for what Council's doing. And I know, you know, if I guess at any time any organisation could always do a bit more, and we are trying. But yeah, I think pretty well every point that was made we agree with at Inner West Council. I think it's fairly universal amongst the staff at all levels. There was one issue I must confess, the issue of the reserve at Haberfield, Reg Cody Reserve. We don't have an answer to that yet, but we will have that shortly, so I must apologise for that. It's been quite difficult to track, to go back and find the trail about negotiations over the compensation for that, and I wasn't involved personally myself, so I promise I will get back to you as soon as possible. On the issue of the Stage 3 assessment, as everyone's probably aware, $250,000 was allocated in December last year for that assessment. The close date for the competitive process for consultants to undertake the assessment of the design plans closes tomorrow, and we'll appoint a consultant on Friday. We have to follow due process and go through a competitive process on that. So that's well underway. And we'll go through a similar process for the environmental impact statement. So I think we're well placed to address some of those process issues that were raised about the Stage 3 assessment, and we've certainly identified all the main issues that need to be addressed there. And yeah, so I think overall, unless there's some other issue that's obvious to someone that I may have missed, I think there's generally a sense that we're on the right track and there's consistency, and we support all the issues that have been raised.
And we will get back on the Reg Cody Reserve issue, because that was raised at the last meeting. I hope we would have had a response on that by now, but we don't. I'm going to indulge one question from Mr. Lozano, who's got his hand up.
It's the sale of land. How could you not know where it's up to? You sold land for $3,000. It was underpriced. You said you were going to take it to court. That was months ago. By now, the bulldozers are well.
Let Mr. Banfield answer.
Yes.
How do you not find that?
Yes, I'm aware that negotiation has happened. It's just a case of finding where we can find that it's reached a conclusion. So.
We will get an answer on that as soon as possible. Kendall, can we please follow that up with the property people and all the lawyers if that's what we need to do? Thanks. Okay, I just want to say a couple of things. Sorry, yes, yeah. I'm going to address that. I'll address that, Rochelle. Okay, that was one of the couple of things that I wanted to address. So, first thing I want to address is the community organiser position. We've had a couple of different views here tonight. My view has been that in the 12 months I've been in this job, that I have found that position to be valuable. I've found it to be useful in coordinating the many WestConnex action groups that we have across the local government area, and I think in what is now, I guess, called the WestConnex, the coalition against WestConnex, I think that position has been useful in framing that. I am, however, mindful that I'm entering a bit of a tricky period in my period of administrator. Well, not that it hasn't been tricky from day one, let me tell you, but a period in which I need to be a little careful about committing the future elected council to a particular course of action. So I've heard a couple of different views on the community organiser position. If I was going to be continuing the council for 12 months, I would absolutely fund that position for 12 months because I think it's very useful. But what I'm going to do Bearing in mind that the position is funded till the end of September, because that's what I did. I funded it for a full 12 months, so it still has another 4 full months to run. I'm going to amend the resolution to, in the first instance, write to the City of Sydney to see if they will stump up the $50,000 co-funding for the position, because I think that is important. They're equally on the front foot, as many of you have pointed out tonight, about WestConnex. So I think the least they should be able to do is continue to co-fund that position. So if you can put up the amended recommendation. So in the first instance, I'm going to write to the city to see if they will fund the $50,000. We still have that period of time while the position remains on foot. We'll do some further consultation through the LRAC, which is the current Representation Advisory Committee to Inner West Council, as to whether there is an appetite to continue the funding of this position or whether it should wait for the elected council to sort it out. So in the first instance, I'm going to try to get the commitment from Sydney City Council for the $50,000 and defer any final consideration of signing off on the funding, bearing in mind that I don't want to necessarily commit a future elected council to a course of action that it may not want to take. I would do it if I was going to be the future elected council, but I'm not. So that's what I'm going to do in relation to the community organiser position. The one-off funding to Rozelle against WestConnex, I'm very happy to support that, and that's continuing. No problem at all. I think that's a worthwhile initiative. Number 4, if we can scroll down, I don't know if you can see the full thing there, to point 5, which is the point Rochelle made. The council will further consider the need for expert consultant input into the Western Harbour Tunnel proposal and an appropriate budget allocation, and we'll come back to future council meeting on that point. We're still at a very preliminary stage on the Western Harbour Tunnel. So there is an opportunity to influence that outcome, but I just do want to do some further work on what would be an appropriate budget allocation for that and come back on that. So they're the amended recommendations. I thank everyone for your wholehearted participation on this item, and I adopt those recommendations. Thank you very much. And I'll move to item 2, which is the Traffic Committee, Local Traffic Committee report. I have only one registered speaker, which is Chris Woods. Chris is waiving speaking on this item. So are there any speakers on item 2, the Traffic Committee report? No? Okay, so I'll adopt the recommendation. Item 3, the Leichhardt LEP proposed floor space ratio control amendment. John Stamoulis spoke again about this item previously. I've got 3 registered speakers. First name on the list is Bruce Threlfo.
Administrator, I'm a planning consultant and a former development manager at Leichhardt Council. I support the adoption of these amended FSRs. They've been a long time coming. They will actually benefit the community. The work I do as a consultant is small-scale stuff. Under the current rules, people who want to extend their houses are up for a lot of additional expense to run through these unrealistic FSRs. The recommendations coming from the PAC, Council's panel, the department make sense, and I strongly urge that they be adopted. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Rochelle?
Following on from the comments that the Administrator made previously, and I should also say that while you're a pleasant enough person, Richard, I don't acknowledge your authority over this council, as I think you're aware. You made a decision previously that you shouldn't be making decisions which impact on a future council. I'm really concerned about the fact that this is actually overturning a decision that was made by an elected council, the elected council of Leichhardt. It was clearly a decision of the elected council of Leichhardt that it should be option 2, which is adopted, and not option 3. And there are very good reasons for that, because the elected councillors on that council understand the nuances of the local area and the reasons why, while there are breaches of 4.6, there is a very particular geographical and land use structure in our local area, which means we have some of the smallest lots, not just anywhere in Sydney, but anywhere in New South Wales and probably in Australia. We have some of the most difficult areas in terms of development. We have almost every development, particularly on the Balmain Peninsula, is a challenging development because of the cheek by jowl nature of all of our developments. So when you touch floor space ratio, while it's a very crude measurement of what the development will actually look like, it is actually quite an important use by the local council in order to control some of the worst types of development which we've been able to in the past control. My concern is that while you've sought submissions, I remember, for example, the work that was done on the FSR review, that we saw that quite a lot of those were actually also being sourced from decisions from the Land and Environment Court. And I know more recently that you've sought the opinion of the IHAP co-chairs, but I mean, we're looking at a situation where the control of planning has been completely removed from the community. There is no voice at all of the community anymore in development controls. But when there was a voice of the community, the voice of the community was very clear that they didn't want this kind of allowance of additional development because they didn't want the consequences of that, and because they wanted to retain what is, we believe, quite a special and unique kind of streetscape that we have within the Leichhardt Council area, and a streetscape which is valued not just by local residents, but by people right across Sydney. So
a minute, Rochelle.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I believe that this shouldn't be a decision that we move to option 3. I also, with my colleague and former councillor Craig Channels, did make a submission to you as well about our concerns about the misrepresentation of the way this went out for consultation. I believe that it should go out to consultation again and be more widely consulted. I believe that a lot of the submissions that have been received are in fact from developers or from people who are planning development on their local in the local area. And we really need to get a community input on this, which I don't believe that we've got now. And we certainly shouldn't be seeing the decision of an elected council being overturned by a council which has been forcibly amalgamated in administration. Thanks.
Thank you. Craig Channels.
Thank you. Turn that off. As you know, I wrote to you on, I think it was probably about a month and a half ago when this first went out on exhibition, and raised concerns considering the consultation, the information that was given to the consultation, to people. For those that aren't aware, as Rochelle mentioned, the previous council did actually go with option 2, and that was described in the consultation as pretty much what had been happening in the previous council. Option 3 with the higher floor space ratio wasn't what had been happening. It was actually in the report. When it came out on consultation, it was option 3 was described as what had been happening generally in the previous council, or words to that effect, when it clearly wasn't. I think in one point it misrepresents what was going on in the council, so it does the other council a disservice. And another point, it actually gives I think a misleading view to residents that, well, this has been going on for years and the impact's been bearable, or it minimises the impact when it wasn't the case. Subsequent to that, you did reply back, and I acknowledged that letter, and acknowledged that yes, I'm sure you can represent yourself there, but acknowledge, yes, that could have been an error there, but you thought that there was enough people consulting and enough people replying, and noting that in the period since, in the last 18 months, the floor space ratio had actually increased. I as well think that it's misleading, it's not solid. You may well get the same response from residents, but if we're going to go out on consultation for such an important issue, such a planning issue, then we really should have the information right so that people can then decide. On another aspect of it, I did also just want to mention, and I'll just grab, the document here. I just note that the document also refers to option 2 as what had been happening as well. The document in the agenda. The other thing I want to talk, it's raised on several occasions, it's certainly raised with me when I was on council, that there are a range of other controls that actually, can get the desired outcome and lessen the impact on residents. In my experience, having, gone through hundreds of DAs and then sat through, and in my own personal experience, items such as, overshadowing, setbacks don't always get a hearing. I know in my own personal experience, overshadowing, it didn't get taken into consideration. We have in our LEP and our DCP actual, minimum sunshine, minimum, you're supposed to get at the winter solstice and things like that. They can often be overridden. And it's FSR that might pick it up as a catch at the end there. And I've seen that on a number of occasions. If there isn't an impact on residents around the developed property, then, that's a good excuse to have a look and see. Could I just have one more minute?
Sure. Yep.
Yeah, that's a fair enough reason to say, well, there's this increase in FSR isn't having a negative impact, we should go. But that's also a point where you can actually stop, pause, have a look. Is there overshadowing? Is there sort of a bulk and scale and overbearing structures that aren't, in my experience? I know the staff come through and I saw it in the report that there's other 6 or 7 conditions before you get to FSR, but they're often missed. And this is a good catch-all at the end. I'll just also, I suppose, make the point that in, I think it was 2013, Council, when it reviewed its LEP and the way the FSR was calculated, there was actually effectively a sort of 8% increase in the FSR at that point. We had another vote back in 2015, which has come out from here to have a look and increase the FSR. This is kind of the third in about as many years. This keeps creeping on, and at some point I don't think that's really as viable, and we should actually sort of bring it back, send it back out to consultation, as in my original point.
Thank you, Craig. John Stamos.
I won't repeat a lot of what I said earlier in the meeting this evening, except to say that I do agree with the 2 ex-councillors, one being an ex-mayor of Leichhardt, is that I think really this needs to be opened up to consultation. And again, I make no point about whether the FSRs are too high, too low, or anything else. It's just that I see a number of distinct flaws in the matrix that's been presented. It's very confusing for our public to understand. And I think it's a policy that our new council would not want to put forward because of those flaws, which will create problems for council down the track. It will, and as I said, will create problems for designers, applicants, objectors. And I think the best way of handling that is to say that we should open it up to a broader consultation, review all methodologies, and then determine what is best for our community for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Anyone else want to speak on this item? Yes, John Jopling.
Thank you, Administrator. This certainly was put to the old Leichhardt Council. It was a considered problem that we had, the argument over floor space ratio throughout the whole of the Leichhardt Council in both the Balmain, the Rozelle, Leichhardt and the Lilyfield area. Yes, it is very dense. Yes, there are a lot of small plots, and yes, there are many factors. But the floor space ratio was considered, it was looked at. Yes, there were 4 options that were raised, and I've got to say the initial council looked at the proposition, and I suspect if they could have, they'd have moved option 1, which was do nothing. The answer is you can't do nothing. It's been further considered. I think it should be dealt with now to clarify for anybody who's coming into the new Inner West Council what the rules are and what the regulations are. I believe Marrickville and Ashfield areas have been tidied up, and it's now time, because this went to LRAC as well, to be considered and argued. It was put to LRAC, the various points were put forward, it has been consulted. There are more than the usual number of people that are raising the same arguments that simply says, let's go back and do nothing. Leichhardt also put it to the IHAP people and asked them to consider which of the 4 options they would recommend. And it's interesting to note that they recommended option 3, which was the option that gave the best results and allowed for modern techniques, modern architecture, and a reasonable area, which mostly had been taken out as a separate argument and run by a separate case under 4.6. We shouldn't leave it for a new council. It's been going on now for a heck of a long time, and it is long overdue that this council gets on and tidies this up, and when the new council comes in, they have some positive factors to deal with. If we defer it now, we're simply going to continue with the old arrangement where the floor space ratio, looking at the Department of Planning, we're already beginning to have some difficulties with the old proposals of Leichhardt, with the number of variations they were asked to deal with, and we should be now looking at how, because architecture has improved immensely, they have great outcomes, and so we get the best results for dealing with the whole of the old Leichhardt area. It's not just Balmain and Rozelle, but we're now getting out to look at Annandale and the old Leichhardt part of the area. It's been passed, LRAC sent it up. This council has already agreed in the first stage. This now takes us to the situation of going out to the planning and the council to deal with presenting the documents. I think we should get on, we should do it now, we should be positive, and it will be a great progressive step forward for this council, which is long overdue.
Thank you, John. Frank Breen.
Thank you. Yes, I'd just like to remind everybody that Leichhardt Council voted for option 2, and that the reason Council is now considering option 3 is because it has been instructed to do so by the department. So it seems like we've got no choice in the matter, but I'd like it to be on the record that I continue to support option 2 as compared to option 3. I agree with Craig Channels when he points out that our existing development control plans and the like don't often lead to the best outcomes. And as a councillor on Leichhardt Council, my intention at the time was to try and have the development control plans modified so that it better reflects the priorities of the people who live in Balmain. Maintaining the character of the Balmain area and the Leichhardt area more generally was a prime consideration of people that I met when I was campaigning to be elected back in 2012. And I still view that the development control plans were not adequate enough in ensuring that from my perspective, there was sufficient space available for native vegetation on individual lots. The Leichhardt Council area does have interesting features, as Rachel Porteous pointed out, and it was a real challenge to try and increase the vegetation, native vegetation, I should say, right across the former Leichhardt Council area. So I see that the move to change the floor space ratio doesn't assist that. And I think there's a job ahead of the new council in looking at its development control plans to try and ensure that, from my perspective, that there's a lot more opportunity for native vegetation on individual lots. So I'd just like to register those concerns. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank. Any other speakers on this item? I'm going to ask Simon Minoski, the Group Manager Strategic Planning, to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator, and thank you for all the comments. There are a couple of key principles important principles that were driving the review of floor space. One of them is to a more genuine attempt to reflect the FSR being approved and development being built. And another important principle was being the certainty, giving greater certainty to residents on the density of development likely to occur. Is it perfect? Possibly not. But based on the analysis to date, this is the best set of controls or FSRs we believe will define density in residential areas in the former Leichhardt area. I do acknowledge that there is difficulty in development in parts of the LGA, the former LGA, but the FSR, yes, it is an important control. It is a crude control, and however, there are controls relating to residential amenity, heritage, conservation, setbacks, overshadowing, privacy, open space, landscaping, and urban design, which all independently and collectively also affect development and shape development. We do note that the recommendation for option 3 has been consistently supported by officers. It has been supported by the Independent Planning and Assessment Panel at Leichhardt. It has been supported by Department of Planning and has been supported by the Independent Planning Assessment Commission. On the issue of misrepresentation, I just want to also cover off that on that issue because I think it is important. So initially there were 4 options in total. The report to Council on 6th of December 2016 referred to the following options. Option 2, minimal change, or option 3 being the modest change. An analysis of options 2 and 3 at pages 23 and 24 of that report indicate that both options better reflect what is being approved than the current situation, but with option 3 to result in fewer clause 4.6 variations. The planning proposal itself states at page 2 that the intended outcomes of the amendment are to ensure that floor space ratio controls a more accurate representation of Council's current pattern of development approvals, and to reduce Council's reliance on 4.6 when approving development applications for residential development in the R1 zone. We did have 1,070 visits to our website, 809 documents downloaded, which resulted in 199 submissions coming through to Council. Of those 199 submissions, 131 supported, or 2/3 supported the recommendation for option 3. 1/3 obviously did not. And the other thing I'd also like to point out, there has been quite a bit of analysis in terms of the DAs and what's been submitted versus what's been approved in relation to 4.6. We've looked at all residential development applications from July 2015 and to June 2016, which is the latest block of stats that we have at the moment, which indicate that Council determined during that period 344 residential development applications, of which 199, or close to 60%, relied on 4.6 variations to the FSR standard. And of those 199 applications, almost 90% were approved with FSR variations above 10%. So, look, it's a recommendation. We think, again, based on the analysis that we've done to date or over a long period of time, this is probably the most genuine attempt to reflect FSRs to development and remove or reduce. I say reduce because there still will be flexibility through 4.6. Our move to reduce the reliance on 4.6.
Thanks, Simon. Look, I don't. There's no particularly elegant solution to this. I think the issue at the moment is an LEP which, probably like all our LEPs, at some point needs to have a comprehensive review and reconsult with the community about what they think is appropriate for their area. That's something that's certainly not happening under my watch, but it will be a future project for Inner West Council. I think the best I've been able to do on this is to consult the LRAC twice. So to be mindful of the fact that there is still a cohort of former councillors who have chosen to be on the local advisory committee, and this has been taken now twice through the local advisory committee, once prior to exhibition and once just this month in relation to the final LEP. And they were supportive of the changes that are proposed. I don't think we have much room to move on this, so I am going to adopt the recommendations in the officer's report and finalise this LEP amendment to the Department of Planning. But I do accept that there is a need to do some further consultation on a comprehensive LEP going forward, and it may well result in more fundamental changes to the planning controls in those areas through that process. This is a bit of an interim fix to take, this endless clause 4.6 variation that we're dealing with, the officers are dealing with. So it's not a perfect solution, but I think it's adequate to move us forward from where we are right now. So I'm adopting those recommendations, and thank you all for your comments tonight. Moves us to item 4, which is Development Advisory Assessment Process Improvements. Got Bruce Threlfo, if he's still here to speak on this item.
Administrator, look, I'd just like to emphasise that I'm speaking here in my capacity as a local resident of 40 years and a planning professional who's worked in this area for a long time, and a planning professional who basically works on small-scale developments, which basically means I'm working for your local residents and ratepayers. Now, my concern with the draft policy is that while it's dressed up a lot as supposedly leading to an improvement in customer service, it won't. I think it's largely addressed at setting up a set of mechanisms which will enable the council to reduce its processing times on paper, but won't actually improve the customer service to people who want to do small-scale building works. It's not entirely the council's fault. It's frankly the Department of Planning's fault. Their obsession with processing times literally doesn't work at the small-scale development level of the inner city. You can't do much complying development in our council area. You've got a lot of small lots, you've got a lot of conservation areas. Most house extensions need a DA. And it's not a ticker box affair. The other thing is I'm going to refer to Leichhardt, Ashfield and Marrickville a little bit further. I do a lot of work in all those council areas. There's a different planning culture at the staff level within those 3 councils. It's going to be an interesting challenge to pull that together. There's a different set of controls. It's actually unrealistic for the state government's objective for 90% of house DAs to be dealt with in 40 days. I've had a number of senior council staff, both past and present, express this view to me over the years. And I think it's arguable that, frankly, that as a target should be challenged at the state government level. In terms of the references to the recently issued state government best practice policy, again, I don't think it's inappropriate. It's appropriate for the inner city. And with respect to Elizabeth, I think she acknowledged that at the consultation session. Secondly, one of the telling things in the report is a table that lists processing days for Leichhardt, Ashfield and Marrickville. Now, with respect to the Ashfield situation, it's rather manufactured because they have a process where if you're taking a DA to lodge, they won't let you lodge it.
Another minute, Bruce?
Yeah, okay. So that table doesn't actually reflect the length of time that applicants have to engage with council from start to finish. It just represents the amount of time that it's formally in the system. Now, what would I like you to do? I mean, firstly, I wouldn't mind if you would defer it for further consultation with stakeholders, but I suspect you're unlikely to want to do that. So what I'm going to suggest is that you adopt the policy and review it in 12 months' time. 2, that in section 3C of the draft policy that you change 14 days in the 3rd paragraph to 28 days. That will deliver some improvement in customer service. Thirdly, that council staff take advantage of the stop the clock mechanisms in the current Act, which they tend not to do, but that's a way to start to address the processing times and the image of the council.
Need you to wrap up, Bruce, if you can.
And fourthly, to set up an ongoing consultation process to improve overall micro-processing. There's a whole lot of things that need to be addressed. Engineering requirements, heritage assessment. These are the aspects which, if changed, will deliver better customer service. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Anybody else speaking on this item 4? Vic Macri.
Thanks, Jeff, for the chance to speak. I did make my views known at the ORAC meeting, but I think I have to publicly put them on the record. I agree with former Speaker Bruce Thorfro. Being a former councillor for 12 years and chairing the Development Committee on Marrickville Council for 9 of those years, I actually got a fairly good insight in what goes on. I was actually the council on Marrickville Council that introduced pre-lodgement into Marrickville Council as part of the mechanism we actually used in assisting people to get through DAs. Can I say that it is going to be difficult to actually get any better outcomes with what we have in front of us, and that's no disrespect to the staff that have actually worked on this plan. Quite mindful of that. I think the issue is not the issue of so much getting a pre-DA, because pre-DAs are always a good way to go. But when you're changing the person who is given the pre-DA advice and putting them in another person's hands who has a completely, well, they're different. Some people like white, some people like black, some people like blue, some people like red. Not in the actual numerical compliances in the DCP or the DA document, in the LEP documents. It's in the subjective issues where you're going to be challenged. And the person who is making that decision will be the person who's assessing it, not the person who's given the pre-DA advice. So the challenging thing is that person who actually signs off on it takes responsibility for that DA. And that's not going to sit very well with people if they're not happy with what's been put in front of them. And I really discourage in council all my time, council departments working in silos, because this to me is like 2 departments working in 2 different silos. And I can't see anything that's going to come good of it, particularly the fact that I believe the community participation in the DAs, which we had in the past, is really going to be challenging now, because an applicant's going to come in with a drawing, he's going to put it forward, he's going to be told by a pre-DA officer to completely amend this, change that, change this, change that. And he goes out and he spends money to do that. He then has an assurance in this document that he will have a smooth process into the assessment and it'll be quick. But the community consultation happens at the same time of lodgement. So the concerns of the community then, where do they go? I mean, that could send the applicant on a completely different direction if those concerns aren't met. And really, it'll be a problem for anyone who's dealing with that, whether it's an IHAB panel, whether it's council staff, and community satisfaction is what we want. Chairing that committee, I always look for win-win, where people left the room somewhat satisfied, that had a good hearing and they understood what was going on. Well, I don't think they're going to get that out of this process. It's really, really difficult. And we shouldn't be focusing on what the state government wants. We should be focusing on the outcome of our residents. And as I'll say again, the Marrickville Council had the highest community satisfaction rating of all the 3 councils that are represented in this room, and one of the highest in the state. That wasn't for ignoring the community, that was through working with the community. And I don't think this is actually going to deliver that to the community. I think they'll be very unhappy with it. And I don't think it is going to work as smoothly as you think. And you could be making promises here you're not going to be able to keep. And that's always a bad look for council. If I go in there and I say, well, that's it. I went through it myself personally. So I'll just be a couple more seconds. With a pre-DA process with my home, I had no community responses that were unsatisfactory. Everyone supported my proposal around me. And then it got to the point where we had all the preliminary drawings done. Council staff gave me tick, 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 tick. It went up to the officer that had to actually say yes. And she said, no, I don't like it. And I said, why? Well, I don't think that suits the streetscape. Well, hang on. All my neighbours do. Your previous staff said yes. And it put me in a situation where I had to fight for my DA. It caused me a lot of anguish and suffering, and I don't like to see the community put through that. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. Any other speakers? John?
Thank you. Just very briefly, I'd like to alert Council early that I believe that part of this whole policy should take into account that we should start preparing some quality statistics and information to report to councillors on the new council, and we should start designing this now and possibly presenting a pro forma to the LRAC so that ex-councillors can have a look at these with the potential of having a report prepared for the brand new council. This is a core function of council. It's something that our residents and community always talk with councillors about, and we need to be fully informed about every aspect of the DA process, and especially now that a significant part of this has been handed over to an independent panel, it means that councillors are further distanced from this process. So I would hope that as part of the recommendation, we could adopt an item 3 that says that preparation of a draft summary information statistics or whatever you wish to call that paper be prepared for the LRAC to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Other speakers? No, I'm going to ask Liz Richardson, Group Manager Development Assessment, to respond to some of those issues.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator, and thank you to the speakers. The purpose of this policy is threefold. The first intent is to start to align the policies and the practices and the procedures of the 3 former councils. The second point is to improve the level of service that we're providing to our customers. For the former Marrickville Council at one point in time in recent years did have a dedicated pre-DA advisory service, but for the first time we are looking at a significantly sized dedicated advisory unit that is customer-centric in its thinking, with its overarching philosophy to provide clear, consistent advice to our customers in collaboration and consultation with them. In terms of how it provides better customer service, certainly what we are doing in this space is for the very first time being able to provide a collaborative environment in that pre-advisory team for customers to work through their applications, right from sketch right up to detailed working drawings. That will enable speedier assessment times for all applications once they hit the DA books, so to speak. And there's, as I said, much more scope for collaborative discussion in that pre-DA environment than there is at a DA space. And thirdly, it's unashamedly starting to align ourselves and council with best practice thinking and procedures with respect to development assessment, and that includes our processing times and doing our best to start to align ourselves with state government targets around housing approvals as best we possibly can in that environment. So with respect to some of the matters raised by the speakers, yes, it's absolutely intended that that policy would be reviewed within 12 months. The proposal in the policy seeks to provide applicants an opportunity for a 14-day period in which to provide us information. That aligns itself with the recent publication through the Department of Planning on the Development Assessment Best Practice Guide, and that's the current benchmark in that space. The former Leichhardt Council did have a 21-day arrangement in its existing policy. With respect to the stop the clock provisions, regrettably, most of the councils fully utilise those stop the clock provisions as best they can now. Regrettably, our benchmarking that is undertaken from the Department of Planning does not account for those so-called stop the clock timeframes. We are measured from the day on which the application is lodged with us to the point at which that application is determined. So inevitably, and as I have drawn out in that report, that you're looking at a doubling of the assessment times whenever we're entering into that negotiation phase. Then an ongoing review process with our customers, absolutely. The Inner West Council is just at its infancy, really, of starting to develop our processes and our protocols for development assessment, and there is absolutely further scope once we start to develop that through for further engagement with our key customer group, as we did through this policy. With respect to the concerns raised around changing the person in that process, so having one particular officer dealing with something at pre-DA stage and then having a separate officer at DA stage, inevitably, again, we're working through our processes and practices, but certainly the model that we're looking at in that advisory team is that any decision is not a decision of one officer, it is a decision of two, and the same thing happens at DA stage, so that you always have a check and balance over that. That in itself will mitigate and level out these sorts of discrepancies. And following up from that in a more formal sense, there will be an internal guide around and a charter between those two teams that will clearly set out how those relationships with our customers will be moving forward, where there may or may not be a difference of opinion. And then with respect to community participation and collaboration in that DA stage, I take on board the comments made by the Speaker about the concerns around that. And inevitably, the world's best pre-DA system can only get you to a point where we can cover off on 90% of the issues that we might be anticipating. However, there will always be an element of concern or feedback provided through a DA that we may not have anticipated, and they're absolutely those circumstances in which we go back to the applicant and request that they amend, provide us further information, and we have those discussions. So I think I've covered off on most of the issues there, Mr. Administrator.
Okay, thanks, Liz. So this is essentially about mums and dads. It's not the big end of town. This is about trying to get better timeframes for alterations and additions, new single dwellings and dual occupancies. And we do need to do better. Our current determination times are averaging around 100 days. A good pre-DA system goes a long way on this, and I think as long as it's supported by adequate resourcing, which we're making a commitment to, and proper protocols between the pre-DA staff and the people who are assessing the DA when it comes in, so you don't get that planner shock, if I can call it that, of suddenly getting a different view, as Victor Macri highlighted, compared with what you might have got earlier in the process. I think that's something we've got to watch. And as with all our policies, it will be reviewed after 12 months. So I think that's the ultimate feedback loop. Is it working? If it's not, it should be amended. If it's a total failure, which I don't think it will be, then it should be scrapped after 12 months. But I think it'll prove its worth. We need to give it a go. I think it's modern DA processing that we're trying to achieve, and something that will provide better customer service for the mums and dads who are largely doing these developments in our local government area. So I will adopt the policy and its review in 12 months' time, and we will come back with the DA stats inquiry that John Stamalis raised, because we are collecting good stuff now, and we'll have a discussion with LRAC about that. So thank you all for your contributions on that matter. Move to item 5, which is the post-exhibition report for Marrickville LEP Shop Top Housing Amendment. I have no pre-registered speakers. Did anyone want to speak on that item? Item 5? No. In which case I will adopt the recommendations, which takes us to item 6, which is a draft code of meeting practice amendment. I just want to preface discussion on this by saying it's not intended that this code of meeting, any amended code of meeting practice will come in during my time in office. I'm going to see out my days, well, hopefully not my days, but if you understand what I mean, my time in this job under the Leichhardt Code of Meeting Practice. I'm not proposing any changes during that period of time, but at some point, clearly there needs to be an Inner West Council Code of Meeting Practice. All the other Metro Council merged councils have adopted a new code of meeting practice. Most of the ones in the country have. We haven't. We're proposing obviously a consultation period on this. I have got a number of registered speakers, and I'll go in order of listing and start with Rochelle Porteous.
Thank you. Look, I'm extremely concerned about this draft code of meeting practice. I also question the administrator and the purpose of bringing in a new code of meeting practice for a newly elected council, considering the statements that he has made earlier this evening about not making significant changes prior to the new council taking over. Is there anything that's more significant than democracy? That's what the council is about. And the Leichhardt Code of Meeting Practice is probably exemplary in the way it allows the community to engage in council meetings. I know it annoys the staff. I know the staff would love to remove it. And I know it also, to be honest, I know that my Labor and Liberal colleagues when I was on council would have loved to have got rid of the Leichhardt Code of Meeting Practice because it is challenging because it allows the community to come and speak without pre-registering, and it allows everybody to speak on an issue that is important to them. But that is democracy. Democracy is messy. It takes longer. And the reason for that is because it actually gives people a voice, and a voice that needs to be heard, because a council is supposed to be a council of the people. It's not a council of bureaucracy, and it's not a council just of the people that are elected. It's the community that needs to be there and needs to be engaged with the council and to be making decisions which are shared by the community. I'm afraid this completely trashes that. It completely trashes democracy. It's an abomination as far as I'm concerned. I'm horrified to consider that this would even go out on exhibition. I'm horrified that LRAC apparently thinks it's a good idea. I can't understand why they would. I know it's got a predominance, but it's still just an awful code of meeting practice. I would strongly urge the administrator retain the position that he has stated earlier, that this does not go out on exhibition. This does not become the code of meeting practice that is adopted by the new council, that we retain the Leichhardt Code of Meeting Practice into the new council. It's a perfectly good code of meeting practice. It has a very strong cultural tradition, dating right back actually to the Labor movement. It actually should be the sort of code of meeting practice that you see adopted by other councils. So to trash it in this way, I think is the wrong way to go, sends the wrong message. So I'd urge you to withdraw this, not go out on exhibition, and leave the new council to make their own decisions about what they want for their code of meeting practice. Don't impose this on a new council. Thank you.
Thank you, Rochelle. Chris Woods? No? Craig Channels?
Thank you. Like my colleague, I was going to say Councillor Porteous, but Rochelle Porteous, I also am concerned about this. And also considered your statements previously. I was heartened to hear that you didn't want to you didn't want to burden the next council with some other significant decision. I see this as a significant decision. I understand that you're putting it out on exhibition, but it goes to the heart of democracy on how the residents, they're not customers, they're residents, engage with their council. And I know, having, been a councillor at Leichhardt for about 3.5 years, that it can be robust. Democracy can be messy, it can be time consuming, but it is a great, you get great engagement and participation, and that's the important thing, participation from the public. I would encourage yourself to actually pause on this as well and put it out to leave it to the decision of the next council, considering it's them who will need to operate under a code of meeting practice. It's a code of meeting practice that they will need to, abide by. It's something that they should decide on, something that they should consult with the public, not this council then imposing a set of meeting practice on the next council. To pick up on a couple of bits, or at least one, the public forum part deeply concerns me. It constrains the public to an hour at the beginning of the session when you may get people who want to talk on particular items coming further down. And I think that type of I don't think that's a good engagement there. You're looking at the public sort of starting up the meeting, going through particular parts that may or may not be lost later on, an hour or two later on when the item comes up, and won't also be able to engage with the councillors. It's often the case that the public will have a question that a councillor can then answer, or a staff member can then answer, and then provide, I suppose, further context to the case they're putting forward, either, for or against. So that deeply concerns me, sorry. And I think here, comparing it to councils such as the City of Sydney that doesn't permit, members to address public, or Ryde, Parramatta, Northern Beaches that permit minimal, minimal consultation is quite an error. I mean, we're comparing it to the lowest common denominator there in public engagement. So I think that's pretty poor process there, or pretty poor in the report. One thing I would, I suppose, ask, and you might laugh, but we've sat through, and I have been defending the right for the public to engage with their councillors, and I think it's an important part of democracy. It might not be the case in an undemocratically elected council that you're a part of, and I'm not necessarily addressing you here, Richard, but I know that you know my feelings on that subject, but it's not a moment for humour. The one thing I would ask, perhaps if you're not of a mind to sort of pause, is that if it does go out for consultation, perhaps you'd leave it up to the next council to actually decide whether to implement change or not. And that may be something that you could actually, maybe that's a bit of a halfway house there. I don't know. Another problem.
All right. Thanks, Craig. Yes, Alex Lofts.
My understanding is that a new council, and if I'm wrong on this, that a newly elected council, one of their first items of business would be to adopt a code of meeting practice. And that means that even if there are some modifications that are put to them at that stage, as are in the document, they would then have a chance to debate the code of meeting practice and to modify it if that is the will of the majority of the council. I do think we need a robust code of meeting practice. Obviously, the Leichhardt code had great merit, but it is not good practice to be sitting in a council meeting at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning trying to make quality decisions either. I think there has to be some discipline around that, because it's not good. It's not good for decision making, and it's not good in an occupational health and safety way for officers who sometimes have to travel great distances to go home driving in a very tired condition when they've been working all day as well. So there needs to be some more discipline in our code of meeting practice, I think. I'm not sure this is the ideal. I don't know whether the 60 minutes at the beginning of the meeting will be good in practice, but the new council will be able to decide that. So I think it's fair enough to have a model. I think it's fair enough to give this a go, and it can be changed. Whatever the case, it is no bad thing for members of the public and for councillors to come to a meeting with a sense of the need for some sort of discipline and some sort of organisation. One thing I noted in the Ashfield practice, we had to finish our meetings at 11 o'clock. That meant debate became more disciplined. People did not talk for 40 minutes on an item. We actually made decisions. People were more concise in their presentations, and it worked. We got through the business paper. We had public participation. In that case, however, we did have people who turned up were able to speak, just at Leichhardt. We did encourage registration, but we always allowed anyone to speak and on the items as they came up. So those things may have to be changed. But we do need we need to also recognise that this new council, and it may not last, there may be a plebiscite or whatever, and we may demerge in the future. I have no clue about what will happen there. But it's going to be 186,000 people wanting to have a say, or not all of them, but there'll be a lot of people turning up to some meetings. You can't simply have unlimited speakers in that situation, I think. You need people to be able to be more disciplined and have a certain number for, a certain number against, because often, and I've sat through many a council meeting at Ashfield where people get up and they say, just one more minute, they say the same thing again and again. Whereas if you had some limits, people may be more organised, have 3 for, 3 against, and make sure the best points are put forward. Whatever happens, we need councillors on this new council who are disciplined. To my knowledge, there's only one councillor in any of the former councils who has been disqualified from public office for misconduct, both within council meetings and outside. But if we do have a robust code of meeting practice, hopefully that sort of conduct will be much more discouraged in the future. And we won't have to, as in that occasion, have the Office of Local Government and ultimately the Local Government Tribunal intervene in what should have been a matter dealt with in a council meeting. So it's fair enough to put this as a draft to the new council, I think, for them to debate. I'm not sure if it's going to work in practice, but it's worth a go, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Caroline, did you want to talk? Caroline Stott.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator, for giving us the opportunity to speak. I spoke about this at the ILRAC a couple of weeks ago, last week, and I was concerned mostly by the fact that we were asking all residents who wanted to make, or people who wanted to make presentations, to do them all at the commencement of the meeting. Now, these meetings, even under this this new code of meeting practice, can run for 4.5 hours. It's a long time to actually hold so many ideas in your mind if you get presentations from a lot of people on a lot of different subjects or DAs or items which come up for discussion. The problem is that when residents or people come up who are concerned about WestConnex or whatever, they want to hear the outcome before they leave the meeting. You're not going to be able to have 60 minutes for public speaking, and then everybody's just going to go home, because everybody will still want to stay to hear the outcome. And I think this is a departure from what, it's definitely a departure from what Ashfield had. We actually did trial this, as I said previously at the previous meeting of ILRAC, and at a couple of meetings, and we found it unwieldy, and all of the councillors decided, or the majority of the councillors, I don't remember exactly how many, but a majority of us decided that we didn't like it, that it didn't work as well as what we were doing previously. I understand Leichhardt did something similar to Ashfield, and so as did Marrickville Council. So what's suggested here is entirely different from what the councils were doing before. I've got no problem with the fact that we say, well, it's 3 minutes, three, you can have 3 or 4 people speak for 3 minutes, etc., 3 for and 3 against, etc. That's not what I have the problem with. What I have a problem with is asking everybody to speak at the beginning of who wants to make a presentation to do it at the beginning of the meeting. So a lot of people come from work. They can't be here at from 6:30, and they might miss their opportunity. And what we actually did at Ashfield Council, we used to have a show of hands to see how many people were here for the different items, and we dealt with the items for which the majority of the people were here for first, and then we went on to the next item.
Another minute, Carolyn.
No, well, I think that you will find that, hopefully when this actually does go out on exhibition, that actually people do realise how different this is going to be, because it is going to be a departure from our current practice. And I don't think it's a wise thing to do. I would like to think that that we will not do this, but we will maintain our current policy or policy of allowing people to speak whilst when their item is being discussed, because you get the flow of debate to and from, and you have question time sometime, and that can be very helpful. So, thank you.
Thanks, Carolyn. Yes, Lucille McKenna and then Frank Breen.
I won't repeat everything that's been said, but just quickly, there's no doubt that we value our democracy in the Inner West, and those messy meetings with lots of people speaking are certainly democracy in action. I support the majority of this code that's proposed. The area that I also have concern about is the forum at the beginning, but I would really like to see what the community thinks when it goes out on consultation. We will be able to then make a better judgment at the end of the consultation period. Thanks.
Thanks, Lucille.
Just one other thing, that code of meeting practice that we're using is actually 2009 version, and certainly I think it should be reviewed. Thanks.
Thank you. Frank.
Yes, thank you. I'd just like to speak in favour of the Leichhardt Council code of meeting practice. I thought it worked well. I note Alex Loft's comments about keeping timing in mind and finishing at a reasonable hour. And I think that that's something that could be improved, but I think that otherwise the Leichhardt Council code of meeting practice worked well, and we've been using it here, and I think that's evidence that it continues to work well. So I know I'm assuming it's going to be the decision of the new council to work out what the code of meeting practice is, but I'd just like it to be on the record that I thought the Leichhardt Council practice worked well, and I hope that others agree with me when the new council comes to look at it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Frank. Vic Macri.
Thanks, Chair. Since everyone's plugging their former council codes of meeting practice, I'll plug the Marrieville one. And I think the staff should do some delegated research in there and just look at council meeting times, how long the council meetings lasted, and the amount of items that were discussed. I mean, the Marrieville Council was made up of 4 Labor, 4 Green councillors, 2 Liberals and 2 Independents, and all agreed that was the best process, because they all agreed that there were no good decisions after 10 o'clock at night. That was the consensus that they had. So I agree with the majority of what you put forward. I just don't agree with the forum in the beginning. I think items should be available for people to speak to, but we need to do them as we're dealing with them. So I'd say what we had was 3 speakers for and 3 against, 3-minute time limit. We stuck rigidly to that, and it worked well for us. It actually helped the community engage with us, because they knew they didn't have to come here and wait till 11 o'clock at night or 12 o'clock at night to have their say. Also in the beginning of the meeting, we would let the people know if there were more people registered for or against something, we'd let them know who they were, and they'd actually network together and actually work out 3 speakers. A lot of people didn't really want to speak. They felt compelled to speak, and they were much happier when someone else put their points of view forward for them, as long as their issues were aired. That was the main thing. When there were large issues that were challenging, like as you have WestConnex, well, that's when you opt to a workshop situation and you form these committees and you get fed up the information from the committees, as is happening here. And that's how you deal with the larger items and you don't get bogged down. And I note that the WestConnex took over an hour tonight. And we had a lot of speakers speaking on that. If that was limited to 3 speakers, we heard the same things repeated again. It didn't make any real difference to the recommendation. The recommendation was supported and that was it. So I just really think when this goes out, we should have a look at that and put a table of meeting times, how many items were discussed, and community satisfaction with that is the important thing. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Victor. John Stamoulis, and then James Gilronan, and then John Jobling.
While I can almost guarantee that a future council is probably going to raise the prospect of a demerger on our new council, I'll address the issue at hand, and that is that we need to have a code of meeting practice for the Inner West Council, and that's very, very important. I think we need to look at that and make sure that we have a very robust code of meeting practice. And therefore, I see some of the ideas here as stale, and that is that the council meet 10 times each year. We have a council that goes from the harbour side to the bay side, and if we think that this can be done 10 times each year, certainly Leichhardt Council felt that once we moved away from our Building Development Committee meeting, moved to the IHAP, we took that opportunity to have an additional meeting forum called our Policy Committee. And I can see that as being a possibility for an Inner West Council. I don't believe that the issues across the new municipality could be done in 10 meetings a year or at least 10 times a year. So I'd be moving to the two meetings a month. We stripped out the key policy items, as I say, in Leichhardt Council, and had a policy committee meeting. And I think that is valuable for our community. And it is also valuable for councillor workloads to be able to span out those workloads and plan out those workloads over given months. I think it's important both for our community and the councillor workloads that we start moving in that direction. Additionally, I think that our community should be present and speaking at every single meeting. I would hope that a hallmark of the brand new Inner West Council is community democracy, our councillors there before its people, in front of its people, and our community being able to participate in those meetings. I believe that other councillors have mentioned that this evening as well. I would see this as the hallmark of a modern council, that we adopt those principles. So I'm thinking let's move away from those old practices that go back to the 1930s and 40s and maybe look towards the future, the 2030s and 40s. Thank you.
Thank you, John. So James Gilronan and then John Jobling.
So we should be quick because there are other issues to get to tonight. But in response to the recommendation, I think that now really is a good time to put as many things to the community as possible. The recommendation doesn't suggest actually changing the code of meeting, which is good. However, I do think that perhaps the actual material put to the public could be more than simply this code of meeting practice. There are plenty of ideas that could go out to people that might be useful for the next council to have that information regarding the public's opinion. Now, we know that the new council will be dealing with more issues, and so perhaps we need more time to deal with those issues. Maybe some ideas about having more than one meeting a month are appropriate. Obviously, some of the councils won't want that, but if it means we can hear more ideas from the public and give more time to each issue without requiring everyone to stay very late, that could be a really good step in the right direction. So yeah, I think it's great to put more things to the public, and maybe in the material that we give them, we could offer more options for them to respond to than simply this very uninspiring code of conduct. Thanks.
Thank you, John.
Certainly there is no question that meetings that go beyond 12, 1 or 2 in the morning are desirable, or definitely you're on top of the ball. But let's look at it very, very quickly. We've heard tonight the very many views that have been put forward, which are all legitimate and all quite interesting, and quite frankly need to be researched on the basis of what is going to go out to the public. The point's been raised that Leichhardt heard everybody, and yes, they did, and I think it was a very good thing, and I'm quite sure the new council may well come to that conclusion. But quite clearly, while this administrator is here and this council under this structure is here, we're operating under Leichhardt rules. So that's not going to change. The new council, of course, Mr. Administrator, as you well know, will be required to adopt a code of practice. Now, to ensure that this happens, and I think it's pretty important, the comments, you know, we might need 2 meetings a month, I think should be included in the situation that goes out. But when one looks at the recommendation, I strongly support it. The first part says the draft code of practice, etc., to go out on public exhibition. So this is the way we will find out what the public in the old Ashfield, Marrickville and Leichhardt councils will think and will have to say. And it will come back and it will have to then be tabulated. You've made the point very, very particularly that at the conclusion of it, the council will then get a further report and come up with some thoughts which would then have to go forward to the new council for their consideration and their determination. This council will not obviously be making that determination for a new council coming in, but now is clearly the time to begin to understand what we need to do, to understand the difficulties that are going to be encountered in a huge area, much bigger than any of us have been used to. The fact that we may have to have 2 meetings a month to deal with it, as perhaps are broken up into policy and other matters. We may even have to have recognised tours on weekends by buses to take the councillors round to see some of the things, because they will have trouble getting their time off other than on the weekend. I think it's good to start now, Mr. Administrator. I strongly support your recommendation. It doesn't take us into any strange grounds. It still allows all the public to come and have their say, and we can ask the public what they think about some of the thoughts that have been put forward. Do you have it 60 minutes at the beginning? Do you allow them to come in and speak on each topic? There are some people that cannot get there, as has been raised. I think tonight you've heard a lot of options that need to be considered, could well be added to the option of going out to the public, but let's see what they come back to us with so we can offer the new council something in a positive thought for them to think about.
Thanks, John. Maurice Mansell.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. I certainly don't agree on this public forum at the beginning. I speak on behalf of the residents I supported in the South Ward. A lot of them are of non-English speaking background, and in the best of time, they get lost following the agenda, let alone the issue discussed at 6 o'clock, and then the matter is raised at 10 o'clock. So this is definitely a matter that needs to be addressed. The other thing I'd like to mention is, Mr. Administrator, you said your year was difficult. I sat in that chair and my year was annus horribilis from the act of disruption by certain people. And I'm disappointed that the Department of Local Government presents itself as a toothless tiger. It doesn't really support the council we as council, as a mayor or whatever, we do everything by the book, but we haven't got the support by the department. And I hope as a result of this amalgamation and as a result of all this shenanigan, that something could be done, that when we reach a decision from our end, when we follow the instructions or whatever, we are backed by the Department of Local Government. I hope that they hear our message. Thank you.
Thank you, Morris. Any other speakers on item 6? Code of meeting practice? No. I'm going to ask Tanya Whitmarsh, Group Manager Governance, to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator, and I'm delighted to hear so much feedback from the floor. So thank you very much for all of that. And it's precisely what we're looking for so that we can open up a discussion. When I took the IAG and the LRAC members through the background to why we're doing this, there were a few important points which I'd like to share with you. This is just part of our continuous improvement program to prioritise high impact policies, and I think that observation has been made already, that this is a very important tool. It also reflects some better practice improvements we have already made, including things like our webcasting and an orderly flow of organising speakers for the meetings. We do want to create a strong foundation to get the newly elected council off to a really good start. And yes, there is a heck of a lot of business to get through, and I'm very interested to hear the suggestion that we may require a couple of meetings a month, and that would also provide that extra flexibility with the amount of time for people to speak, instead of trying to cram it all into one fun-filled evening. And of course, we really want to encourage respectful and fair treatment of all concerned. This is a partnership between the councillors, their constituents, and the officers who are there to support them. I'll try and capture as best I can. There was a lot of feedback there. Yes, it is an important change for council, but it has been correctly observed. Council will have an opportunity to review this when it comes on board. We want to have something there ready for the new Inner West Council, not something that has been inherited from one of the legacy councils. Well, I'm very interested to hear what the community says about pre-registration. That has been used very successfully at a number of councils, not only some of the legacy councils of Inner West. I certainly hear the feedback on the public forum and perhaps encouraging people to continue contributing throughout the course of the meeting. And I certainly can take on board some of those comments about offering different options as part of the consultation, and I think that's a great idea. A question about whether we're being compared to the lowest common denominators. I think you'll find that we have done some research on that. I'm very happy to go back and get some further numbers and comparisons done on that. The issue around discipline in structuring the meeting, I think, is very, very important. We do want to make sure that as a good governance practice, we encourage sound decision making. As I said before, things can be changed by council. This is an iterative process. It's something that we should be looking at regularly. And interestingly, the Office of Local Government is working on a model code of meeting practice, and it has had a lot of feedback from governance practitioners like myself. That will not be ready by the time the new council comes on board in September, much to our disappointment. So we are pushing on and leading the way. Yes, and 4.5 hours is a fairly substantial meeting. We haven't hit the 4.5 hour mark yet, and I can see people getting very tired and have drifted away. This is not the only form of engagement with our community. I would be very concerned if councillors relied that heavily on feedback during a public forum, during a council meeting. There's an awful lot of stuff that happens in the lead up to matters getting onto the agendas. And we also have access to our webcast capabilities, so that helps make this forum accessible. Very interested to hear that we might put forward the option of the 3x3, and yes, we've had advocates there, so again we'll put that out as an option. I also note the comment about the people who may struggle to get to the meeting early if there is a public forum segment early in that part of the meeting. Then there was also a comment made as to getting a show of hands as to the interest in items. I'm having trouble reconciling those two comments, given that if people are struggling to get there at the meeting at the start, they won't be there to put their hand up, but we can work that one through, I'm sure. Yes, we are dealing with a very old document from 2009, that observation from Lucille. Thank you very much for that reminder. Even our legislation is not kept in place for more than 5 years at a time without having to be remade. So the timing, yes, could be improved in our meetings. I think there's room there also for discretion from the chair. We know there are some very high interest matters that come before Council. WestConnex, our administrator, has demonstrated his ability to accommodate those sorts of needs. It's not hard and fast, but we do want to provide some reasonable guidance to help the chair and the councillors. And I think that just about covers everything. The comment about meetings 10 times a year, that's only a minimum requirement. That is a requirement under the legislation. Of course, you can meet every week if you like. I'm not recommending that, by the way. Yes, I appreciated the feedback. Yes, it is a very important opportunity to consult with the community, and there will be some other important documents coming forward to help get the council established, including the expenses and facilities policy, which is one that we'll have to review in its first term. So, yes, please, I would like to go out and take this feedback forward and consult widely.
Thank you, Tanya, and thanks everyone for the comments. I do think it's worth starting the conversation on the code of meeting practice. I'm not at all committed to having a public forum at the start of the meeting versus integrating comments into the meeting. I think there are two clear schools of thought on that, and I think that's absolutely something fundamental that we can have a conversation with the community about. I just think it's important for the new elected council to be in a position to deal with some of the feedback on this issue rather than starting afresh, because it will take, some months to work through this issue. So adopt the recommendations to do the consultation. There were a couple of minor amendments that the actual code of meeting practice did not reflect what was said in the officer's report. So we need to make a couple of minor changes as identified there, and then we do public consultation, and then we come back with a further report to council. And I'm very interested to see what the community has to say on this issue, and quite open-minded about where we go next. So with those comments, I do adopt those recommendations. Now, some people have been waiting very patiently, and I suspect it's for item 8, which is the Koori Cup. But just before we get to item 8, I hope this is going to be very quick. Item 7, sending Frank to Canberra for the National General Assembly. I don't have anyone wishing to speak on that, and I don't think Frank wants to. No. I won't go that far. But I adopt that recommendation, and off goes Frank. So, item 8, the Koori Cup, and I do have 4 speakers, and Shane Phillips is the first on my list. And I apologise it's taken a while to get to you, but I'm very interested to hear what you have to say.
I was thinking, I hope it's not going to go 4.5 hours. No, I'm joking. But look, we'd like to acknowledge everyone and acknowledge the council who supported us with the Koori Knockout last year. For people who don't know, the Koori Knockout is the largest modern-day event in the Indigenous calendar. And it's given us it's a chance to showcase community, showcase strengths, and it's a whole lens of strengths. But a collaboration of family, community, elders, all aspects of our community. And And I think it's been a launching pad for a lot of Indigenous athletes, but also a meeting place to get families together rather than funerals all over our country. So we're pretty grateful that the Leichhardt Council gave us that support last year, and as we ran the event, and because the winner of that carnival hosted. We were very ambitious and we wanted to do a good job. And we obviously had some flaws in some of the stuff we did, but it gave us an opportunity to rethink and redo it to make sure that we represent a good, strong collaboration of our community and the council. So we're hoping, for support, and we're very anxious because we're hearing all over our community that they're hoping to hear from us soon with a confirmation of a ground, and where some of us will be able to get some sleeps. But we are grateful. We're grateful, and we've brought together a new collaboration of people who would help us organise the event much better as well, and some people who are event organisers themselves. While that happens, it gives us a chance also to, to learn, and they're empowering the people who are part of the committee, and obviously good volunteers who work hard and wear many hats, get a chance to actually look at the way we can run these things professionally. But also, being given an opportunity to showcase these strengths for our community is a massive asset, and we need to make sure that we get the traction that we require for a few generations of the kids that we know this is going to impact on. So when saying that, we want to thank you for doing this. And in language of this, I suppose it'd be fitting to say, Dinyura Wongol Nai, Bayabawi Nini Nini Mailyagu, Mayol Biol Monoal. So I'm acknowledging and I'm saying this is a place of the Wongal. I want to say today we are strangers, but tomorrow we are not. Thank you.
Christine Robinson. Okay, Christine, thanks. Craig Channels.
Look, I'll be brief because I saw this item on the agenda earlier on. I wasn't sure if people were speaking up, coming up to support. There obviously are. This was a great event last year. It was a ripper over the whole weekend. I attended several matches. I was really pleased as a former councillor on the Leichhardt Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander Committee when this was first brought to council by Deb Lennis, and then or to the committee, then council by Deb Lennis. It was a great initiative. It was a great event, and I know that in going through, and as I think was mentioned by the previous speaker, there were some things that maybe could have been provided more by council and other things. So I think the budget allocation, the increase in budget allocation is tremendous. I thoroughly support it. It's a great community event, bringing everyone together, and if people haven't been to it, it's a ripper. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Kirsty Reeks.
Just wanted to say thank you to the council for all their support and to let them know that big business is behind this event as well. And I've come from Downer EDI to come here as a project manager expert in my normal day-to-day work and spend quite a few weeks and long nights here with the community to assist them to get this running to the level it needs to happen and have the professionalism to the event. So thank you to the Inner West Council, and I really look forward to coming back to the area in October. So thank you.
Did anybody else want to speak? John Jobling?
I shall be extraordinarily brief in this occasion. Last year, Leichhardt Council was invited. Would they be prepared to host it? It was a huge success. Everybody that went down to the multiple games, and there were a large number of people, it was good for business. The people that intermixed and discovered an awful lot of things they didn't know. Putting it very simply, Richard, I would be absolutely appalled and very upset, and I think all the former Leichhardt Council would be, and with one exception, all the LRAC members would be, if we didn't support it this year make the money available, and you will be stunned at the outstanding success that it is, and it will continue to grow from strength to strength. We've only just got to make sure that the same team keep winning it so we can keep it in the Inner West Council.
Thank you, John. Other speakers on this matter? Yep, Lucille.
I just want to say that I'm really excited about it. I think it'll be the first really major event for the new council, and it's going to be a stunner, I'm sure, and I'm really looking forward to a great 4 days. Thank you.
Peter, did you want to say anything? Is this your area or John's? I never... Peter Gainsford, the
It's a
Deputy
collaborative
GM.
approach.
Collaborative approach.
So it's between John's staff and ours. No, the event went well. The staff are excited to participate and help in the same form as last year. So.
Great, thank you. I wasn't able to attend last year because I was out of Sydney, but I only heard good things about it, and a very positive collaboration between council staff, LRAC members, and the Aboriginal community, and everything told me it was just like a really great vibe and a fantastic occasion. So I'm 100% happy to support the recommendation in this report, which is to commit that funding to enable this year's event to be every bit as successful as last year's. So I adopt those recommendations and look forward to a continued partnership on this great initiative. So thank you. That is item 8, and I do also thank those people for hanging around for a long time about other worthy matters that we needed to discuss before getting to your item. So I now have item 9, the Inner West Council Grants Program. I don't have any speakers on this item. If there are no speakers, I'm happy to adopt the recommendation. Item 10, which is we've dealt with, the Inclusion Action Plan, we dealt with as item 1. Item 11, the Inner West Council Investment Policy. Don't have any registered speakers, but yes, Alex Lofts and then Frank Breen.
As I said in the LRAC, I'm very pleased that we're going to adopt this policy, particularly that we will, by this time next year, have 70% of our investments in non-fossil fuel investments. I think that's a great move. It means that we can move further beyond that, as is appropriate. I think it's good to have a transition. I think all of these programs need a transition so that we can make sure, as the policy says, that our investments remain sound and that there is a good return for council. After all, with a good return, we have more money to do stuff for our residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Frank?
Yes, thank you. I was pleased to see the recommendations that we made at the LRAC included in the papers tonight. I want to acknowledge the positive approach by the council officers in listening and to our arguments and including that in the report. So I'm very pleased about that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Frank. Anybody else on this? Michael, Pav? No, I agree. It was great that we got a good debate on this at LRAC and have had improvement of the policy as a result of that debate. So I think it shows that the process is working, and I'm happy to adopt the Inner West Council investment policy as per the recommendation. Thank you for that. Item 12, Inner West Council investments. Any speakers? I don't have any listed. So I will receive and note that report. Item 13, the quarterly budget review. Mark Drury made some comments on this before he went off with man flu. Mark, if you're watching. I have got James Kilronan who wants to speak. Does anybody else want to speak on this item? Lucille?
Hi there. I always find this last section like a huge amount of information to go through, but I feel like, again, it's one of the most significant parts of the agenda, which is really exposing the balance sheet of the council. And I'm really interested in the way that the projected end result has been balanced at zero. It really suggests a lot of engineering, which is commendable in many ways, though it also raises a bit of suspicion as to how the figures are being balanced, particularly with regards to capital works being delayed. And I'm just wondering maybe if I could get any feedback as to how the next government, the next council, is going to deal with the losses that are being delayed to them, and to what extent are these figures reflecting the future requirements that are being set back. I hope that makes sense.
I'm going to get, is it Michael or Pab? Michael, but do you want to respond to that now?
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. I'm not sure what we're talking about, the losses that are taking forward. Effectively, if I can explain this a little bit, the prior councils adopted a budget which was in a loss position of about $4 million. What we've done in this budget is clawed back some of those monies through savings and so on. So we've balanced it back to a zero position. So we've actually gone forward rather than backwards. And the new elected council will be in a better position than what we were saying we were going to be 12 months ago. And that's why we get to the zero rather than a negative position. The way council budgets work are effectively you get income from our residents, and they're used to fund events, much like the Koori Cup, and capital works. And basically what isn't spent is put on the balance sheet to then be brought back the following year for the capital works that haven't been achieved. So that's why you get to a zero position, because you use whatever funds you have. And that's how the budget is balanced to zero. Hopefully that's answered the question.
Thank you, Michael. And Lucille McKenna, did you want to speak?
Just in relation to this comment at the beginning, the review of the operating budget and capital budget on 344, we're showing a year-to-date surplus of 9.8 million against a forecast balanced budget as at 31st of March. So that surplus relates to those projects that haven't proceeded. Is that?
It will be a combination of projects that haven't been, that aren't proceeding, and also expenses that we're going to make for the rest of the year as well.
Were there any other questions or comments on this report? Okay, well, thanks for that. I'll receive and note the report and approve the budget adjustments required. I think that concludes the meeting. So thank you very much, everybody, for your attendance, and see you in June, if not before. Thank you.